Welcome. This is another interview for the Growth Through Adversity series that we are doing for the Neurodiversity Foundation in honor of Pride Day. And I'm with our speaker, Rachel Worsley, today. Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Great. Well, I know a lot of interesting things about yourself, but maybe you'd like to introduce yourself and what you do.
Yeah, so my name is Rachel Worsley. I'm the founder and CEO of Neurodiversity Media. Essentially, we're a media company that's about making information accessible through with technology. So basically, we've got three different things that we work on, which is one, we've got our content marketing service, which includes our Scribe Studio. Basically, it's providing content marketing and visual scribing services to companies to help get their message around neurodiversity or any other complex concepts out there. We have our NeuroWork newsletter, which is all about translating research papers about neurodiversity in the workplace into accessible stories for people to learn more about how to bring neurodivergent people's potential at work. And then our sort of third kind of thing that we're working on right now is a resource library tech platform where we want to kind of bring all of this stuff together, one place, kind of like a Netflix for information resources where people who want to learn more about neurodiversity in the workplace, employers, businesses, neurodivergent individuals can all find that information in one spot. So that's sort of a summary of what we do.
Amazing. Well, I'm going to go a little bit deeper into that later in our interview, but first I'd like to kick you off with a question around our theme, which is in the field that you're working in, what do you see the state of neurodivergent individuals to be at right now?
Absolutely. I think this is a really, really great time, I think, to be neurodivergent, especially because one, if the automation of a lot of jobs and to say robots kind of thing, creativity is going to be a very big skill, and that's a skill that a lot of neurodivergent individuals have. Also, with kind of recent pandemic, that's kind of led to a shift in major work practices like working from home that actually does benefit quite a few people who are neurodivergent. There's also plenty of other autistic people may struggle with change, but I like, options are good for everybody. People like to work from home, then at least it's now normalized as an option. So I think our contributions in this space, I think, are going to be more valued and recognized as time goes on because of those particular changes recently.
So you're pretty optimistic even at the moment as to where we are already.
Yeah, I mean, I like to look at it in the long term, I suppose. Yeah, short term, I know, there's definitely struggles, and, not all struggles are distributed equally. Like, there's some disruptions in personal lives, there's disruptions in work lives. It really depends where you are. But long term, I think it's, I think the greatest inventions and advances in society come from times of hardship, like in World War II and beyond. And so I look at history and I go, history kind of goes in cycles. And I think this will be one of those times that history will repeat itself eventually.
Great. So would you have answered the question differently if I had asked you it in January?
Yeah, actually I would, to be honest. Yeah, it's funny because I did mention on LinkedIn that I sort of called it quite early actually, that I think coronavirus pandemic at the time would be still good for neurodiversity. And I stressed the long term because a lot of people were kind of upset about, but right now, and I go, I agree, right now it's not great. And, I've experienced the bad side effects of it and then the good side effects of it. And I think it's all about how the individual responds to such crisis. So that's what I always see. I try and be on the optimistic side because it's just practical. Like if you just are pessimistic, you can't do anything about it and you just kind of get stuck. But if you can always look forward to what you can do about that situation, that just usually leads to better results, in my opinion.
I would agree. Is that optimism also what led you to start your company? Can you tell us a little bit about how that happened?
Yeah, it's a funny story actually, in the sense of, for me, I went to a symposium about neurodiversity in employment, and I remember being in this place thinking, oh, okay, there's a lot of people talking about this space, but they don't really know how to get this message out there effectively. And so I kind of, thought I'll try and, help them in this space. You know, I had this growing interest. And so I started Neurodiversity Media as a content marketing agency to focus on that written side of things, helping them blog about it, helping them tell their stories better. So that was kind of how it really started. And then it sort of mushroomed to different sort of forms because, you know, I have ADHD and autism, and I like basically, you know, doing different things.
So you're always branching out.
Absolutely.
You're always branching out into doing different projects then.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, yeah, definitely touched on earlier is, you know, I spun out doing a newsletter, international newsletter called NeuroWork, kind of focusing on translating papers that I've finding in Google Scholar about, you know, neurodiversity, autism, hiring programs, all of that. And I was wondering, why is this information not out there? And I come from a medical journalism background, and you know, my day-to-day job was to report on clinical papers for doctors. And I thought, oh, well, I can do the same thing about this research here, because it had some very interesting recommendations for employers and managers, but they don't know this information. So I just started this newsletter initially to just get the information out there, to also help train a journalist at the time, and got some, you know, huge traction on LinkedIn, given the content of the material, workplace focus, internationally relevant, and that's sort of how we got, you know, some initial investment from a tech accelerator to help build this product that we had into something that was more scalable through technology.
Nice. So you actually got funding from a tech company because you're interested in how to better sort of mine the research for takeaways that employers can actually use?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, to clarify, it's a technology accelerator program called Remarkable, and so they're a disability-focused tech accelerator here in Australia, which focus on investing in companies who are about making the lives of people with disability better, or solving a major problem with a person with disability. And yeah, they really love kind of the concept of the newsletter translating information into different formats and making it accessible, because accessibility is kind of at the heart of disability, I suppose, in terms of improving outcomes for people with disabilities, accessible information, accessible services, products. And so for me, yeah, it was interesting because, you know, I went through several iterations of how can this work? Because I was kind of like, is it going to be the resources? Is it going to be a LinkedIn style thing connecting people? Is it going to be, you know, just so many different things? And finally settled down into a resource library, Netflix style, just having all these resources in one place, building on the work that I do in the newsletter, but categorizing it in a way that people can find, like you go to the local library, pull out a book. I'm going to do the same thing online, but it's also personalized. So if you want information personalized to your actual career development needs, like early stage career, you know, there'll be resources personalized to you as you log in and enjoy it. And that's sort of our focus. And then, yeah, we have a side project then to just use artificial intelligence to help pull out more of the information from research papers and kind of get this information faster into the resource library. So that's sort of the two kind of bits of technology that we've been working on. So it's been really exciting.
That's really, really interesting, because that's, I think, the way of the future. Also in my field of learning design, you're seeing that the whole field of learning design is becoming much less about building courses and building materials from scratch. And it's much, much more about curation of existing materials and giving people the resources they need in the moment at that specific time for that specific step that they need to take, whether it's work related or career related. So yeah, that's really interesting.
It's interesting because, I mean, that's it. It's like you see that happening on LinkedIn, and you see like companies who are doing really, really well, you know, in this age are the companies who invest technology to personalize a lot of this stuff. So if you're going down the line of personalization and using technology to do so, it feels like, I don't know, at the moment, the companies who do that are, you know, $1 billion plus companies or doing really well. So it's sort of naturally just looking from inspiration going, I think, why can't we do this for information as well?
Yeah, it's really interesting, but you can't do that on your own. So I understood that you work closely with some other people in Neurodiversity Media.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a chief design officer, Izzy Quigley, who is sort of my, visual wizard, for lack of a better word. And she runs our Scribe Studio service, which is about helping companies translate kind of their information, whether it's like at a live event, you know, into visual notes that can be shared with attendees afterwards. It's known as live scribing. She also does custom visual scribing for, you know, people like such as law firms, you know, communicating quite dense legal information into, you know, easy to understand graphics, especially, you know, beginning of the pandemic, people needing to know about their work rights during this crisis. We did some work around that. And we also have done some work in that disability space. So we really love, yeah, we really just love getting information out in different formats. I like writing, but I know people with dyslexia will hate my stuff because it's all words, and it's better if they can access it in a different way, like videos or podcasts or you know, visuals. So accessibility of information, it's going to come down to people have to consume it in whatever format that's going to work for them. And we just focus on writing and visuals because that's our strengths, but we want to branch out in other ways. And yeah, you know, at the moment our team is really made of us two, and then we've got, you know, a couple of contributors who help us with, you know, understanding scientific papers and hopefully, you know, working on the journalism part as well, you know, getting people to hit the ground running and start talking to people and start telling stories as well.
Nice. Yeah, I think stories are very important in that respect as well. But going back a little to what you said, that dyslexics hate your work because it's so full of words. I think for anybody, it's really helpful to have images alongside any text or words, just because it helps you remember the message better because it's logged in different parts of your brain. So that's, I think that's useful, even if you're not specifically trying to cater to dyslexic people. I mean, it's very important to be more accessible in any media.
I totally agree. I mean, that's the joy of when you cater to you know, people's different learning styles and provide accessibility for all. It tends to benefit everybody, not just the person you're trying to be accessible for. So that's a really, you know, important take-home message about this. It is worth investing in that extra time to be accessible because it will help everyone.
Yeah, very true. So I'm curious to know in what ways you think, and feel free to speak your personal opinion here, neurodivergent individuals might be more challenged when it comes to tackling adversity. What's harder for us?
Yeah, I think for autistic people who are really used to having a routine of, you know, getting up and having, you know, work at a certain time and wanting to work at a certain hour or just in day-to-day life, I think with some adversity, there's, you know, disruption to that routine, then that's really, really difficult to handle. And, you know, and I can understand that even though I have ADHD, autism, and, you know, both seem to coexist in strange ways, and I'm probably more, I guess, adept at uncertainty in certain areas, but there are some day-to-day little things where I like it a certain way, and if it gets disrupted, I get very upset about it. And so it's so interesting because then adversity is sort of relative. Most people go, well, that's just a little thing. And I go, no, it's the end of the world, right? And then most people go, oh my God, it's a giant pandemic. And I'm like, oh, this is fine. I feel like I know what to do here. You know, yeah. And so that's sort of the flip side, right? Is this adversities are contextual, for lack of a better sort of phrasing there, because it really depends on how your condition sort of influences the response to that adversity. So I think that's just important to bear in mind. And also just generally, like, yeah, I mean, you know, I don't want to generalize for ADHD because I know lots of people with ADHD also struggled in the pandemic, for example, because it's also routine helps us, and that is disrupted, and that doesn't help with managing, you know, any hyperactivity and inattentive. So yeah, at the end of the day, it's all about just understanding how to, you know, manage adversities in your way and being empathetic to people who may not respond the same way as you do.
That's definitely true, and I'd hate to sort of paint a general picture of how it works for people because we're all different. Even if we all have ADHD, we're all different, and even if we all have autism, then we're still all have different personalities, even when we have that in common. So,
absolutely.
But it is interesting to look at the bigger picture and sort of pick out themes. I know for ADHD, a lot of people have a love-hate relationship with structure. Like they need it, but they also tend to get bored really quickly. So then they want to shake the structures up.
100%. Look, and it really depends on how you view structure. I think for me, like what I've learned too is that if there are certain things I don't like, I need like another person around me to provide some kind of accountability to get something done. So in a way, that's a form of structure, but the structure is okay for me because I chose that structure. I choose to be accountable, and I realize I need that structure. So I will choose you, and if you're willing to be that accountability structure, then I will agree to this structure basically, and give them permission to be, really, really put the structure down if I'm trying to move out of it. So that's my technique that, I think lots of people find that structure is helpful for day-to-day routine and stuff. And, I'm still work in progress trying to put that in myself, but half the time I'm like, but I just want to sleep and more, whatever. And, so it's interesting how you view structure. I think it's a lot about how you view it, I think, and trying to align it with the strengths of the ADHD brain, at least for me, is like, okay, I have to be interested in this structure for it to actually work,
Yeah, but control is important, as you highlighted, I think, in the sense of autonomy in choosing the structure, because it serves something that you value.
Yeah, 100%. Autonomy is so important to any neurodivergent person. It's just because a lot of the time we are in environments where we don't feel in control, or people impose those environments on us, and we have to go along with it and mask ourselves because we think that's the way we have to do it in society. And I just think the moment that you get control back on what you want to live and how you want to live and how you want to, play to your strengths, I just think people are a lot happier. I mean, there are lots of things in life where you can't choose those circumstances, like the pandemic, but then it's just about being able to choose how to respond to that, and that's just really powerful. I think it's just good for anyone's self-esteem to feel in control in some way.
So that's a nice bridge to the next question, which is just the other side of the coin. In what ways do you think neurodiverse people may be more adaptable to adversity?
Yeah, so I think we come with a lot of resilience by way of like enduring so much hardship, I guess, in childhood, and just because we come out as different, or we come up with things that are creative or just full ingenuity, but basically people go, well, that's not part of the rules, right? So it kind of suffer a lot of those kind of put downs and challenges, and I think depending on what sort of people who are in your life at that point in time, you're able to kind of either come at those challenges far more resilient to tackling them, or really struggle to go down a route. A lot of it, I feel like the stories, even mine, it's like a lot of it seems to turn on just having the one or two nice person in your life that just helps you through a tough, terrible environment, and that's all the difference can be made. In terms of like how else we're good at being resilient, or going through adversity, it's sort of I think we tend to be creative in trying to solve challenges and struggles as well. Because we couldn't solve them the traditional way, and so we're more willing to try different things to get out of the adversities we're in. And yeah, I feel like for me those two things really are important, just because we're a lot more resilient than we think, and it always just takes one or two people to recognize that and encourage that.
Yeah, I love that. I hear you saying three things which I would each love to explore a little bit deeper. So one of them is that neurodiverse people tend to have faced diversity already, just by virtue of being neurodiverse. They have to come into conflict with a neurotypical world. So they may be more used to facing adversity. That's the first. Is that
100%.
Understand that correctly?
Yeah, exactly. So just by way of being who we are and being in an environment that never really quite suits us, for what reason, we've just had to learn, a lot of the time to develop a sense of resilience to get through those times and find a place for ourselves in the world, because we had no choice. Necessity, I suppose, is the mother of invention, as they say. So that's kind of, I feel like that's a huge advantage at the end of the day, compared to, because school's just one phase of life. You go through all that, it's quite sheltered. And in the adult world, then, well, like there's no protection from whatever adversity life throws at you, so you already had a lot of practice in your early years, then it just sort of, you know, it's a generalization, but you know, a lot of us do find that it's easier to respond to adversity when we've had a lot of practice of it during childhood.
Yeah. No, but I think that's true. And I think one of the things that you learn is to sort of stop and look inside and think, what do I need? And then explain that to somebody else. And I see a lot of coworkers at the moment, or people that I know struggling with even being able to articulate that, like suddenly working from home and not knowing why they're getting stuck.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, it's a really good point you raised, because I feel like one of the biggest themes that I've found recently is that people are struggling to figure out, how do you ask for help? And I actually have been going through the same kind of struggle with myself, like not knowing how to ask for help, or sort of knowing, but I'm, you know, ashamed for whatever reason, where in the past asking for help had been, you know, had been attached to some quite negative consequences. And that's just something very difficult to work through initially, because, you know, you go, of course, the world has got good and bad people, but if your initial experiences of asking for help, or at least formative experiences asking for help, are quite negative, then it's quite, you know, it can be quite a challenge to overcome that initial, you know, barrier when you realize there are other, you know, options that are more positives. And so I think that's a, you know, I think that's a really great point that you raised.
So that's interesting, because that ties into the third element that you mentioned. I'll just skip the second, which is creativity, and come back to it in a minute. But you also said it really makes a difference whether or not in that early life adversity you had one or two people on your side, one or two allies. So I was just wondering, in your experience, what are great things people can do to help us face adversity in our lives, so that when something big like a pandemic happens, we actually can sort of build on what we already learned facing the adversity of the neurodiversity itself, perhaps. So what do allies of neurodiverse people do?
I think, like, for allies, I think it's so important to just spend the time to listen to us and our struggles, and not to insert kind of opinions or judgments into that conversation straight away, but just listen to us about why we go through the struggles we do, how we're coping with the situation, you know, now, how we asking questions about it is to then just invite, you know, a conversation where it's based on, you know, genuine curiosity and understanding about how can, you know, allies best help neurodivergents to succeed, whether at work, in life, or otherwise. Just having an open mind and approaching any situation empathy is just makes a huge difference. And I think being, you know, recognizing people's strengths and not necessarily, you know, I guess minimizing challenges or weaknesses that could cause, you know, issues and stuff. It's just more like when we really get bombarded with a lot of negativity and negative messages about, you know, what we're not capable of. It's really good to balance it out with what we're capable of, and focus on how do you maximize that area, and how do we manage those other challenges. Because at the end of the day, you know, everybody has strengths and weaknesses. It just happens like our strengths and weaknesses are quite polarized, and, you know, and so it's very easy to point out those particular weaknesses, or if they're weaknesses that are, I don't know, socially unacceptable in society, and you kind of question, well, is it really that much big a deal compared to this amazing thing that somebody can do here? So that's what I feel like, you know, it's based on allies also taking the time out to, you know, educate themselves, whether through, you know, resources like my resource library, or just, you know, just basically understanding more about who we are really and our strengths.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on the strength-based view, of course, because one of the things we're also launching on Neurodiversity Pride Day is my introductory course on strength-based approaches to neurodiversity. I'm a big believer in working with strengths anyway with everyone, but I think it's especially important for people who are neurodiverse. So we lost you there for a minute, so we're just going to resume. We're in the middle of talking about what in what ways neurodiverse people are more able to tackle adversity, and we're talking about, and maybe we should recap that a little bit, what allies to neurodiverse people can do to support us better.
Yeah, so allies can help us support neurodiverse people better by, having empathy and understanding the challenges that we go through, what our strengths are, what we can bring to the world, and listen without judgment, and just letting us talk, and then asking questions to help themselves understand how they can help us better, and simply championing our strengths rather than focusing too much on our weaknesses, because everybody has strengths and weaknesses. It's sort of some of them weaknesses could seem to be socially unacceptable, whatever it is, but we also have great strengths that should be recognized and championed. And it's all about finding the right context for us to flourish, and so those are some of the things that allies can do to help us thrive, whether at work or in life in general.
Yes, it's very much also about manipulating your environment to suit you, and I think that people that support us play a big role in enabling that. So I love that you're building a library of resources for employers to learn more about how they could potentially do that. But in terms of people trying to personally support somebody, are there any resources that you would point people to?
In terms of personally supporting, I guess for me, it's funny, right? But I like to kind of go online and follow Facebook pages and Twitter pages with comics about how, if we're talking about ADHD, for example, Adhd Alien, Danny Donovan, about illustrating kind of the symptoms of ADHD and also how to manage them. There's sort of like, for me, I can only speak for the Australian context, but our local organisations on Autism Awareness Australia, and some of some of those organisations, for me, it's sort of where some of those resources can be found. I mean, it's an interesting question, because I feel that that's kind of exactly why I have to start this resource library, because they're out there, and and I think the information from those official sources are good and all of that, but I don't know if they could still be made more friendly, user friendly, they're more accessible, and I know there's a lot of initiatives around there. But that's sort of kind of the extent of recommending resources, on that support.
Love that. And I would absolutely second your recommendation of looking at Danny Donovan and Adhd Alien. I was talking to Dusty Chbora, who's an ADHD coach in Canada, in Vancouver. And I mentioned the thing we came across with her is that those visual resources also seem to sort of speed up the rate at which we're educating each other. For instance, on Twitter, she's very active on Twitter, and people will come into the conversation not knowing what RSD is, and then 3 people will pop up and will share Adhd Aliens, her comics on RSD, and she just did an amazing new one on how she copes with her RSD, so with some techniques that she uses. And people will leave the conversation knowing like so much more. So
absolutely, yeah, it's just so
accessible visual resources really seem to help speed up the rate at which the education is able to happen.
Oh, absolutely. It's interesting, because that's definitely, it comes to the heart of like what people find the most useful. And it tends to be, even when I was helping some people discover about their ADHD diagnosis and where I would recommend them, I feel like it feels weird, but the first thing I'd sort of recommend to them weren't like the official type resources from the, big non-profit organizations. It was, here are a bunch of comics from these particular artists that could explain some of the stuff. And I feel like that just says it all. It's sort of, at least in this age of the internet and social media, it's sort of like there is more choice. And there's more, artists and people who can explain resources, or, explain concepts well through, visuals and other resources. If they're discovered through the internet, then that's where people can get the most value. You don't have to rely on some gatekeeper or middle person to to do that. People can find those resources likewise, and that's just a really good thing for, you know, helping people in general. The more diversity information, the better, but then it's also, you know, you've got to have quality information as well. So there's always, you know, a mix of that.
Yeah, there's a mix, and I also don't think that the quality of information needs to be lower with those more accessible resources. I know Jessica McCabe, who runs How to ADHD, she does amazing research for each of the videos that she does, and which is always also why I really, really loved having you in this panel of people that we're interviewing, because I know you want to do the same, but to serve people who want to know more about how to work with neurodiversity in the workplace, and you want to have the same science-based, research-based approach, but make it really accessible for people.
Yeah, coming from a different angle, I suppose. I mean, it's funny because we're all, you know, neurodiverse here, but I was like, oh, well, I still want to do it differently from everybody else anyway, because I come with a unique kind of experience and worldview from the education I have, and you know, and I think that this space is well served by people like Jessica McCabe and others who do such a great job with the videos and visuals and, you know, talking about those personal, you know, in the context of ADHD, that day-to-day stuff and some of those challenges and stuff. And I go, look, and there's, you know, maybe there's a gap here of actually there's also people who know what they're talking about, they're called researchers, but they just don't sell their, you know, message or get their message out there in a way that's appealing to the general population. But it doesn't mean that their, you know, advice and recommendations or information is any less valuable than what, you know, the rest of us put out. So it's just about helping them to get the word out in a way that's going to be appealing. So I quite like that, because in a way, like I can create original content, I can do so, but I feel like that's my, you know, 2 cents in this space that's a little bit different, is just helping others who've got the knowledge, more knowledge than me, to better get that knowledge out into the space for everyone to enjoy the fruits of that knowledge.
Yeah, but I think that's an essential role, to help people who are not necessarily focused on communicating whatever their research outcomes are to a much wider world, to do that. That's like super important. Okay, so we're almost coming to our last question, which is, what are the opportunities for growth that you're seeing right now in the field for people who are neurodiverse?
Yeah, 100%. I think in terms of fields, I think, yeah, there's a little bit of a cliche in a sense in the tech industry for sure. There's always, you know, growth, especially in, you know, data analytics and artificial intelligence, as we find, you know, ways to automate or improve processes, but you still need people who can, you know, check lots of things and have, you know, checks in place, and autistic people are going to be great at that attention to detail in some ways, but, you know, a lot of us are really, really creative as well, and as many jobs are made, you know, redundant because of automation, AI can't think creatively at the moment. So, you know, there's always going to be people who need ways to communicate, like in visual design, in, you know, just, you know, writers, copywriters and stuff. Anything that requires a high degree of creativity is very hard to automate. And if neurodivergent people are very good at that sort of domain, then, you know, we always have a chance of getting a job. It's just more like finding the right, you know, employers who are open-minded about what we bring into the workplace. Other areas like, you know, accessibility. Any industry that's focused on accessibility in general, I think that's going to be a huge growth area, because people are, especially thanks to the pandemic, realize that, well, we have to be accessible on the virtual sense. And, you know, there's a few news articles that talked about how some, you know, disabled people were really, really, you know, enjoying the fact they can now, you know, browse museums around the world virtually when they never had the chance to do so because they're, you know, housebound for their, you know, all sorts of reasons, and that accessibility is great. And now that just opens up so many opportunities for, you know, jobs and stuff to manage virtual worlds, because that just opens up a whole new source of revenue. So I think, you know, and I think really last point on that too is, you know, I spoke to somebody who, you know, a mum with 2 kids with autism, who was like, you know, asking her local sort of gyms and stuff, like saying, hey, you know, my kids are really keen to be part of it. It's so noisy here. can you like do a proper quiet hour where we can come in, because that could be 20 extra customers for you, because we all have autistic kids. And they agreed to that and bring in. So I think businesses, it'll be a huge growth area in the future, because I think businesses may start waking up to the fact that there's a lot of customers with spending power here that could spend that money at their business if they were just a little more accessible. So that's a really exciting growth area to look into as people become more open-minded about, accessibility in general.
That's really amazing. That's also making me think of something that local cinemas are doing here. They're now offering, because they can only sell limited seats with social distancing, they're now offering people to just rent the whole cinema for them and their group of friends. But that could also make it a lot easier for people who are normally disturbed in those like really busy environments to go to the cinema in a way that's more accessible to them. That's nice.
Oh, it's so good. I mean, it's funny with the social distancing, like here in Australia, because I think we've made so much more progress in the virus, and we're sort of opening up, but it's funny because we're not really going back to normal, because a lot of people still haven't gone back to the cities and worked. It's apparently still quite, empty-ish, so a lot of us have actually liked working from home, but just kind of like the idea of, having bigger open spaces, like even the very few times that I have to take public transport, having social distancing on trains and stuff felt like a godsend. It's like, oh, social, like my personal space is being respected for once. Like I don't have to sit and be crammed in a sardine and all of that. It just feels great, because then public transport just becomes such a, nice experience once of being noisy or whatever. I've got to put headphones on, like, oh, it's actually really calm. This is really nice. So yeah, it's a very interesting point you made.
Yeah. So if you had kids in your surroundings who were just recently diagnosed with dyslexia, ADHD, whatever, and they were worried about what that meant for their dreams of becoming, I don't know, a doctor or a veterinarian or an engineer, what would you say to them?
If they wanted to be those traditional jobs, I guess.
Well, I don't know if they would want to be those traditional jobs, but if they were worried about what their diagnosis meant in terms of them being able to sort of make a career happen and live a happy life, what would you say to them?
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, it's such a challenge at first, because like with so much misunderstanding, stigma around the conditions, it feels like a death sentence, I think, in some way. But like I think it's just focusing on, well, actually here are some unique strengths of what they bring to the world, and a lot of the challenges I think with advancing knowledge and understanding can be managed and can be assisted with, and basically as long as you focus on your strengths and want to enjoy what you want to do, then your diagnosis shouldn't hold you back. And and let's be honest, this is a spectrum of so many different challenges. I like to think of it that way. And there's often a lot of discussion around why neurodiversity is, for some reason, it only represents one section of the community that might be more able to, I don't know, advocate for themselves versus those who genuinely have challenges. I think it's just about actually just recognizing that, yes, there is a whole spectrum of challenges, and the stories that we hear so far often happen to be on the extremes, but it doesn't mean that people can't have a successful life if you're kind of in the middle. And in the middle is not a bad place to be in. I think it's we've got to look, let's look at statistically, right? It's like, if everyone in the middle will have some challenges, but then they'll have some strengths, and then in the right context you'll be able to thrive, and then the people, and then we just have to be empathetic to either extremes of that spectrum as well, and be mindful that that's the situation you're in, but also there's so many other people that with 10 to 20% of assistance and being open-minded and stuff, we can transform people's lives. It really doesn't take that much, really, when you think about it.
Yeah, I like that thought, that it really doesn't take that much to make the context a lot more friendly to neurodiverse people. And I think that's something we're hoping to contribute to with the Neurodiversity Foundation here in the Netherlands, and also by founding this academy where your interview will be hosted. So that's really
Yeah.
a nice end note. I think is very optimistic. Like you said at the beginning, that's sort of your nature to look at it from that angle.
I try to be optimistic, you know, because like I agree, like there are genuinely, you know, people who have so many multiple challenges and stuff, and it's really tough and for them, and like those stories do have to be recognized and understood, and we have to provide as much support and understanding as we can. But then there's also all of us who you know, who are undiagnosed or unidentified, who do struggle, and, you know, the right resources and help will make such a huge difference in those lives. And I think it's really about, I think, you know, at the end of the day, I like to see neurodiversity is probably the most inclusive diversity concept of all, because it's really based on, you know, the concept of biodiversity, of which we just recognize, you know, as a fact that there's a diversity of wildlife around here. And therefore there's a diversity of, you know, minds across the human population. We all have a mind, I guess, you know, and so that means we value, and when we recognize that diversity in minds, it just means we look at, you know, people who are autistic, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, so on, as like, this is a variation in minds. There are challenges associated, but there's good things about it. And then that should be championed so that, you know, we will go into a society where we just simply accept that as a fact, that we all have different types of minds that can contribute in different ways, and there shouldn't be any discrimination, stigma, all of that. It's just simply a fact of diversity.
Yeah.
And I just think it's just, yeah. And that's, if we just focus on that, that's just going to really help with a lot of conversations about, oh, accommodations or this or that, you know. It's just, you know, one, you know, really interesting point I have to make is that, you know, job coaches in workplaces, for example, you know, apparently I read an article recently that, you know, employers basically are, you know, saying, why do autistic people need, you know, job coaches and stuff like that? And I go, well, why doesn't anybody not require coaching in general in the workplace? We all have things to improve on, and, you know, and autistic people will have coaches who will help them with certain challenges, but everybody needs coaching in general, right? So that's what I mean. It's sort of like, we just have to like focus on, these are just a different set of, you know, people who have different sets of strengths and weaknesses, but it's no different from everybody else. And that's what I love about neurodiversity. It's such an inclusive concept.
Yeah, I definitely have to agree with you there. And I have to thank you very much for your time in doing this interview with us. And I hope to talk to you again whenever we have a theme or something else going on that fits your expertise. But for now, thank you for so much. Being part of our Pride celebration.
Yeah, thank you so much. No, I really, really enjoyed this. Thank you.